If you've been looking for the perfect structured tote bag, this is it. This one's sturdy enough to keep everything upright. Books, your iPad, even your water bottle. You'll learn 3 different pocket styles, including a gusset-like front pocket with extra room, a zippered pocket inside, and organized slots for pens, chapstick, and other essentials. It even has an adjustable shoulder strap, sturdy handles, and a built-in key clip. Whether you're headed to the park, Bible study, or to a coffee shop to get some work done, this bag is ready for your next adventure. Hi, I'm Victoria, and I help you sew practical, stylish accessories ready for real life and real adventures. Settle in, grab some snacks. This one might take you a minute. Now let's jump into the supplies. You'll need fabric for the outer layer, roughly about 3 fat quarters, fabric for the lining, also about 3 fat quarters, extra firm stabilizer. I'm using the Pelon 70 Peltex, which is an extra firm sew-in stabilizer so that the sides of the bag stand up straight. You can definitely use a different one. Just make sure that it's extra firm if you want the sides of your bag to stand up straight. And at 15 inches by 1 yard, I ended up getting 2 packages just to be on the safe side and make sure that I had enough and enough room for error. You'll also need fabric for the pockets if you want contrast, although I decided to go with the same fabric, a 7-inch zipper for the zipper pocket, nylon webbing for the straps. Now in total, you'll need about 91 inches of nylon webbing. That includes 2 15-inch handles, 1 55-inch shoulder strap, and 2 3-inch pieces to attach the shoulder strap to the bag. To be safe, I'd recommend getting at least 3 yards. 2 large heavy-duty swivel hooks with a lobster clasp for the shoulder straps, 2 O-rings, 1 small lightweight swivel hook for the key clip, or you can use a standard key ring instead. 1 metal purse style strap adjuster, and coordinating thread. Now this one is optional. I want to laminate the exterior pieces of my bag to make sure that I can wipe it off and sit it down anywhere and I don't have to worry about getting it dirty. So for that, I'm going to use Heat & Bond's clear film iron-on vinyl. 1 package, which is 17 inches by 2 yards, is more than plenty. If you want to get something else, make sure that it's at least 2 yards wide and at least 13 inches tall so that it'll fit over your exterior pieces. Now this next one is optional, but I would highly recommend it. I'm using Heat & Bond's medium weight fusible interfacing to add structure to the zipper pocket. It technically isn't required, but it does make it easier to work with sewing around the zipper edge, and it gives that pocket some sturdiness, some weight, and some structure so that it stays in place better. Now I've linked all of these supplies in the description so you can quickly find anything that you need. Now let's go ahead and press and cut our fabric out. So before we start, give all of your fabric a quick press so your cuts are accurate. Let's start with cutting the main panels. For the outer and back panels, cut 2 pieces to 12.5 inches wide by 11.75 inches tall. For the outer sides, cut 2 pieces to 6.5 inches wide by 11.5 inches tall. Cut 1 bottom panel to 12.5 inches by 6.5 inches for the outer shell. Now for the lining front and back panels, cut 2 pieces 12 inches wide by 10 inches tall. For the lining sides, cut 2 pieces to 5.75 inches wide by 10 inches tall. For the lining bottom, cut 1 panel to 12 inches by 5.75 inches. Now you'll also need pieces for the front pockets, inside pockets, zipper pouch, straps, stabilizer, and the key hook, plus placement guides for all of them. There are a lot of pieces in this design, so rather than bogging down the tutorial with every single dimension, I've put them all together in a printable pattern for you. It includes the exact measurements for every pocket, strap, and component, plus seam allowance and placement guides to make assembly easier. You'll still see every step of how to make them here, but if you want all the pieces ready to go and perfectly sized, you can grab the pattern via the QR code on screen or linked in the description. And just a bonus tip, when working with this many pattern pieces, I like to keep them attached to the fabric piece I cut out until I'm ready to use them. That way I don't get confused about which one is which, especially with pieces that are similar in size. Now, if you'd like to laminate your bag with iron-on vinyl, this is the step for you. If you'd rather skip the vinyl, you can go ahead to step 3. The timestamp for that is in the description below. To start, cut the vinyl pieces for the outer shell and the front pockets. You'll need 1 for each of the 2 front and back panels, the 2 side panels, the bottom panel, and 1 each for the left and right front pockets. You can use either your pattern pieces or the fabric pieces you've already cut as a guide. The vinyl should be the same size, but don't worry if it's not absolutely perfect. We'll trim it later, and small imperfections will be hidden in the seams. I'll demonstrate with one piece, and then you can repeat the process for the rest. Next, let's fuse the vinyl to the fabric. Peel the clear vinyl off its backing paper, but don't throw the paper away. You'll need it for pressing. Place the vinyl on the right side of your fabric, smooth it out, and make sure there aren't any bubbles or puckers. If it isn't lined up just right, you can lift it off and reposition it. It's more clingy than sticky, so it's easy to adjust. Once it's smooth, lay the backing paper over top with the shiny side down so that it covers the vinyl completely. Now this is really important. If your iron touches the vinyl directly, it will melt and stick to the iron and probably mess up your iron. Now, follow the instructions on your vinyl packaging for pressing. With the brand I'm using, I press and hold the iron for about 8 seconds at a time, working in sections until the whole piece is laminated. I like to turn the paper sideways and press a section at a time just to make sure no edges are left exposed. Repeat this process with all your outer shell pieces and both of the front pockets. Once everything is laminated, go back and trim off any vinyl that's hanging over the edges. All 5 outer pieces and 2 pocket panels should now be laminated with smooth, clean edges. Now we're going to cut out the stabilizer. You'll need stabilizer pieces for both the outer shell and the lining. That means 2 front and back panels, 2 side panels, and 1 bottom panel for the outer shell, plus 2 front and back panels, 2 side panels, and 1 bottom panel for the lining. It's important to note that the stabilizer pieces aren't the same size as the fabric pieces. I've created separate pattern pieces for the stabilizer because it's too thick to fold over at the top edge. So for most of the panels, you'll be using the stabilizer pattern pieces I've provided, not the fabric pattern pieces. The only exception is the bottom panels. Those match the regular pattern pieces and don't need to be adjusted. Go ahead and cut out all of your stabilizer pieces using the pattern pieces, and then you'll be ready to move on to the next step. All 10 stabilizer pieces should be cut out now. Step 4 is to attach your stabilizer to the fabric pieces with a basting stitch. Start by pairing each fabric piece with its matching stabilizer piece. Place the fabric right side up on top of the stabilizer and line it up at the bottom edge. Remember, the stabilizer is cut shorter so you'll have fabric hanging over at the top. Smooth everything out so there are no wrinkles or puckers. To hold it in place, clip along the bottom and sides. I recommend wonder clips instead of pins. They're easier to use on thick layers, and if you laminated your fabric with vinyl, you'll definitely want to avoid poking holes in it. Wonder clips are perfect for this, and I'll link them in the description below if you'd like to grab some. Anyway, repeat the process with all 5 outer shell pieces, then do the same with your lining pieces. Next, take everything to the sewing machine and sew a basting stitch along the bottom and both sides of each piece, leaving the top edge open. To sew a basting stitch, set your stitch length to the longest your machine allows. Sew close to the edge so the stitching will be hidden later. Now, if you're sewing vinyl like I am with this front panel, use a Teflon presser foot. The plastic surface glides over vinyl much better than metal, which tends to stick. If you don't have a Teflon foot, you can try putting a strip of Scotch tape on the bottom of your regular presser foot to help it slide more easily. Once each piece is basted, check your edges. If the stabilizer is sticking out anywhere, trim it back so everything is even. Then repeat this whole process for the rest of your outer shell and lining pieces. Now, this step can be a little bit tedious, but it's an important part of the prep work. The fun assembly part is coming eventually, I promise. But first, we need these solid foundations. Now, all 10 stabilizer pieces should be basted to all 10 pieces of the outer shell and lining. Now let's prep our front lining pocket. We'll start with the pocket piece itself. You'll need to mark the stitching lines for the pockets. This includes 2 pen slots, a smaller pocket, and a larger pocket. The easiest way to do this is with wax-free pattern tracing paper and a tracing wheel. If you've never used these before, don't worry. I've linked both in the description below so you can check them out. They're simple tools and they make this step much easier. Just put your tracing paper face down on the fabric, put your pattern piece over that, and then just trace the lines marked on the pattern piece. Now, I made the mistake here of using yellow tracing paper and the lines came out pretty faint. So I'm going back and reinforcing them with a disappearing ink marker, which I'll also link for you below because it's my favorite marking tool and it shows up much clearer. Honestly, it's just better to start with a darker tracing paper so you don't have to go over the lines again. And if you don't have tracing paper and you don't want to buy it, you can also mark the lines manually by measuring directly from the pattern piece. Now, once your pocket piece is marked, set it aside and grab your front lining panel. Here, you'll need to transfer the placement placement markings for where the pocket goes, as well as the stitching lines. Now, just a quick note here from Editing Victoria. You might notice that the markings for the pocket piece seem a little taller than your pattern piece, and that's because I forgot to account for the seam allowance when I was originally marking this. That's what happens when you design as you go, but don't worry, that's been corrected and accounted for in the version that you downloaded. Step 6 is to fuse medium weight interfacing to the back of the zipper pocket. First, cut a piece of interfacing to match the size of your zipper pocket. I'm using heat and bond medium weight fusible interfacing here. It adds stability and makes the pocket much easier to work with. To apply it, place the shiny side of the interfacing against the wrong side of your fabric. Then press it on in sections, holding your iron for about 8 to 10 seconds in each spot until the whole piece is fused. The instructions say to use a light pressing cloth, but for this, I'm just using the vinyl backing paper from earlier since I already have it available and it works just as well. Be sure to follow the instructions on your package if you're using a different brand though, since instructions may vary. Now we're going to prep a few seam allowances. Let's start with the swivel hook key strap. Take the strip and fold it in half lengthwise with the wrong sides touching and press that crease in place. Then open it back up, fold each long end towards that center crease and press them down. Finally, fold the whole strip in half again along the original crease so the raw edges are tucked inside. Pin it in place and set it aside for now. Next, we'll press the seam allowances for the front lining pocket. For this, we're making a 1/4 inch double fold on each edge. Start with one side. Fold the raw edge in about a 1/4 inch toward the wrong side of the fabric and press. Then fold it over again another 1/4 inch right on top of that fold and press it flat and pin it in place. Repeat the same double fold on the other side and then do the same for the top and bottom edges. When you fold the top and bottom, make sure to include those already folded side edges in the fold. The corners will end up thicker and that's okay. Just make sure everything is pressed sharply and pinned in place so it stays neat. Once you've finished, set the pocket aside. Next, let's prep the outer front pockets. We'll start with the left pocket. Just like we did with the inner pocket in step 7, press a 1/4 inch double fold around all 4 edges. Clip it in place as you go. Now, there are a few important notes here, especially if you laminated your pocket pieces with vinyl. If your pockets are covered in vinyl, you'll need to protect them from the heat. Always place the vinyl backing paper between the vinyl and your iron and press for about 8 seconds at a time. Here's a trick that helps. Use a heat-resistant ruler to press a 1/2 inch fold first. Then unfold it, fold the edge in again to meet that crease, and press it down. That gives you the 1/4 inch double fold without fighting the vinyl. Once you've got the fold in place, clip it down with Wonder Clips. Pins aren't an option here since they'll poke holes in the vinyl. After you've pressed and clipped all the edges, take the right side of the left pocket and fold it in by 1/2 inch towards the inside. This creates that accordion style space so the pocket isn't flat against the bag. Again, use the vinyl backing paper while pressing and clip it in place. Then repeat the whole process for the right pocket. Do the double fold all the way around, then add the extra 1/2 inch fold. But this time it goes on the left side of the right pocket so the 2 accordion folds face each other. Once both pockets are folded, clipped, and pressed, set them aside for a bit so those creases have time to set. By this point, the lining pocket, front pockets, zipper pocket, and swivel hook key strap should all be prepped for sewing and installation. Now our next step is to sew and attach the swivel hook key strap. Start by taking the key strap over to your sewing machine. Sew along the open edge with a straight stitch close to the edge. Then sew a top stitch along the opposite side so it looks neat, symmetrical, and secures the fold. Keep both rows of stitching very close to the edge for a clean finish. Next, mark the placement for the strap on your lining panel. I'm putting mine on the far left side of the front lining panel, but you could put yours on the right side, the back panel, or one of the side panels if you prefer. The steps are the same no matter where you put it. Mark a point 3 inches down from the top. That placement keeps it clear of the top seam allowance and the band that we'll create later. Once you've marked the spot, fold the strap in half and slide on the swivel hook or a key ring if that's what you're using. Line up the raw edges of the strap with the raw edge of the lining panel. Make sure the strap with the hook itself is pointing inward towards the rest of the panel. That way, once the bag is assembled, it will be inside the bag and hang the right way. To secure it, sew right over the edge using an overedge stitch, which simultaneously encloses the raw edge. If your machine doesn't have an overedge stitch, no problem. Just use a zigzag stitch instead and position it so the outside swing of the zigzag lands right on the edge of the fabric. That will give you nearly the same result. Step 10 is to sew the inner front lining pocket. Start by sewing across the top folded edge of the pocket with a straight stitch to finish the top edge. Sew close to the original edge that's been folded over. This keeps that fold from flipping out later. Next, line up the pocket on the front lining panel. As I mentioned earlier, I forgot to account for the top and bottom folds while I made my original markings. Just for reference, I'm lining the top of my pocket piece with the top pocket marking, which is about 2¼ inches down from the top of the lining panel. Pin the pocket in place along the marked lines. Line up the vertical markings first and pin those in place. Then pin around the bottom and the sides of the larger rectangle of the pocket. You may also want to pin along the top edge just to keep things stable, but remember, don't sew across the top. Now, quick heads up, the stabilizer underneath makes this part a little tricky, and you really do need to use pins instead of clips here. Take your time and be careful. I was a bit hasty and managed to stick myself multiple times. Ouch. Once everything is pinned, take the piece to your machine. Start by sewing a straight stitch down the vertical dividing lines first, the pin slots for example, to make sure those are secure and accurate. After that, sew around the sides and bottom edges of the pocket. When you get close to the pin slots, you'll notice a little extra fabric at the bottom. Just create a small fold there to ease it in. Fold the extra fabric in the direction you're sewing so the presser foot glides over it smoothly. If you keep those folds neat, they'll disappear into the pocket and won't be noticeable once everything is finished. The inner front lining pocket should be attached along with the swivel hook key strap. Now our next step is to install the front outer pockets. Grab the 2 pockets we prepped earlier and let's start with the left one. First, sew down the extra 1/2 inch fold on the side of the pocket that faces the center. This is what creates the accordion effect so the pocket has space. With the fold held in place, sew right along that edge to reinforce it. And I mean like literally right on the very edge. This keeps the pocket rectangular instead of slowly turning into a cylinder with use. Go slowly here, and if you laminated your fabric, switch to your Teflon presser foot or put tape on the bottom so it doesn't stick. Repeat the same fold and stitch on the second pocket. Next, sew across the top folded edge of each pocket. Stitch a little less than 1/4 inch from the folded edge so the fold stays flat and doesn't flip open. Make sure all of the side folds are unfolded and lying flat while you sew across the top, then refold them afterward and clip them in place with wonder clips to hold their shape until we attach the pockets to the bag. Now let's add the placement guides for the pocket on the front outer panel. If you laminated your fabric, you'll need to use tape, regular tape or washi tape, to mark your placement instead of chalk or markers. Tape won't smear and it avoids making holes in the vinyl. If your bag isn't laminated, you can go ahead and use tracing paper like we did for the lining pocket. Now, because it's harder to mark the placement guides on this piece, even with the pattern, I'm going to walk you through where to place the tape. So start by measuring 2½ inches down from the top of the stabilizer, not the top of the fabric. Folding the extra fabric over the stabilizer edge can help you measure more easily. Place your tape at the line so the bottom edge of that tape matches the 2½ inch measurement. Remember to account for the tape's thickness since your pocket will line up against the tape, not sit on top of it. Next, measure 1½ inches in from each side edge of the panel and place tape there to mark the left and right edges of your pockets. Again, make sure you're measuring to the inside edge of the tape. It can be a bit tricky. I've had some trouble myself since my tape is an awkward width. But take your time here because you want the pocket to sit within the frame we create with the tape, not on it because we don't want to sew the tape down. Now, for the inner boundary guideline for the left pocket, measure 4 inches toward the center from the right edge of that left side tape and place the second tape line so that the right edge lines up with that 4-inch mark. Now you should have 3 sides of a box with the top guideline and 4 inches between each right edge of the tape on both sides of the box. Do the same exercise for the right pocket, except you'll be measuring your 4 inches from the left side of the outer tape edge. Now you should have 2 3-sided boxes marked with tape on the front panel of the outer shell. The bottom edge of the top piece of tape should line up with 2.5 inches from the top of the stabilizer, and there should be 4 inches of space horizontally between each right edge of the tape on the left box and each left edge of tape on the right box. The 2-pocket guide should generally appear symmetrical on the panel. It is not necessary to create a bottom placement guide. Now let's attach the left pocket. At the pocket's right edge, the side with the accordion fold, open just the outer layer of the 1/4-inch double fold so only one fold remains. Line that edge up to the outer right edge of that inner tape line and pin carefully. You'll need to use pins here, and you want to be careful about where you place them to avoid poking any more holes than necessary. Try to stay along the edge where you'll be stitching. Keep the pocket flopped open to the right with the wrong side up at the stitching line, and sew straight down along that edge with a straight stitch. Next, remove the vertical tape marker along that edge and flip the pocket back into position right side up. Then, with your pocket piece right side up, pull the pocket snug toward the left so that it is sitting flat. Sew a top stitch right along the seam over where you just attached that right edge. This reinforces the edge and keeps the pocket secure. Next, align that left pocket edge to the inside of that left boundary tape with the 1/4-inch double fold intact so the raw edge is enclosed. Pin across the left edge and along the bottom folded edge. At the bottom right corner, form the accordion. To do this, fold that 1/2-inch side fold like an accordion. At the bottom corner, the top of that fold should meet the corner underneath that's already attached. The bottom should now lay flat. Pin that in place as neatly as possible. Be careful here not to poke yourself, and be careful here where you place the pin. The thickness makes it challenging. Top stitch down the left side and across the bottom of the pocket, reinforcing the bottom right corner with a few extra passes. If your machine struggles with the bulk, use the hand wheel to walk through the thick spot. You can add a short 1/4-inch tack up the right edge from the bottom corner to prevent pulling, but do not sew the rest of the 1/2-inch accordion fold up the side. That's where the pocket space lives. Repeat the same process for the right pocket, mirrored so the 1/2-inch accordion fold sits toward the center. When both pockets are sewn, remove the rest of the tape. Now you should have 2 front pockets sewn on the front outer shell panel. Make sure that the pockets look good, are stitched securely all the way around, except the top of course, and that they have enough space. You won't be able to adjust them after the bag is constructed. Next, create the zipper pocket. Start by transferring the zipper markings onto the wrong side of your zipper pocket piece. If you're using interfacing, that's the interfaced side. The easiest way is with tracing paper and a tracing wheel. If you don't have those, you can use the measurements from the pattern and draw the box with a fabric marker, pen, or chalk. Next, take your rear lining panel and measure 2.5 inches down from the top edge. Make a mark there. Then fold the panel in half across the width to find the horizontal center point and mark it. Do the same thing with your pocket piece. Fold it in half to find and mark the center. Now place the zipper pocket piece on the right side of the lining panel, lining up the centers and making sure the top edge of the zipper box lines up with the 2.5-inch mark you made. Pin the pocket piece in place to hold it. Sew around the outside box of the zipper markings from triangle point to triangle point at the ends. Once that's sewn, carefully cut open the pocket along the center line inside the box. Then cut out to each corner along the triangle sides, being careful not to clip into your stitches. Now fold the flaps of the box, that space between your stitching and the center cut, under towards the wrong side of the lining panel. From the right side of the fabric, sew an understitch along that edge with the flap folded underneath. Because of the stabilizer on the lining panel, this part can be tricky. Pin from the back side to help hold it down. If the stabilizer feels too thick to fold neatly, you can trim away that small sliver just between the box stitching and the center cut line. Be very careful though not to cut your stitches or the fabric itself. You still need that fabric to fold under. Next, take the top flap of the pocket fabric and fold it down toward the bottom. Stitch along the top edge from the right side, keeping your seam inside the triangle points at each end. Repeat the same process with the bottom flap, folding it up and sewing the understitch in place. Once both sides are done, push all the pocket fabric through the zipper opening so it sits on the wrong side of the lining panel. Press around the opening so the edges are crisp and flat. Now your zipper pocket fabric should be on the inside of the lining panel and should be laying relatively flat with a defined rectangular window for us to place the zipper. Now we can sew in the zipper. First, Prep your zipper by stitching the zipper tape tails together at each end. At the pull end, unzip it slightly and stitch the ends close so they don't flare out. These little stitches just keep the ends neat for installation. Place the zipper underneath the opening so it's visible from the right side of the lining panel. Double check the direction you want it to open. Pin it all the way around to hold it in place. Then switch to a zipper foot and stitch around the box from the top side with a straight stitch. You'll probably want to use thread that matches your lining here so the stitching blends in. Start just below the zipper pull and sew around 3 sides of the box. When you get close to the pull, stop with the needle down, lift the presser foot, and move the pull out of the way. Then finish sewing the last section so you end where you started and lock it with a back stitch. Test the zipper to make sure it opens and closes smoothly. To finish, fold the pocket piece in half so the bottom meets the top. Sew around the 3 open sides of the pocket piece to close it up. Make sure you're only sewing the pocket fabric and not catching the lining panel. I'm using an overhead stitch here to close the raw edges. Now at this point, all of your pockets should be installed on your bag. The front pockets, the front lining pocket, and the zipper pocket. Yay, we're making progress. Woohoo! Now our next step is to install the strap tabs on the side of the bag. Start with one outer side panel. If your fabric is laminated, use tape for the markings. Place a piece of tape so that the top edge of the tape sits 6 inches down from the top of the panel. That's where the strap tab will sit. Next, measure 2 3/4 inches in from each side edge and place tape there as well. Remember to line up the inside edge of your tape with that measurement so you don't end up with tape underneath where you need to line up the strap tab. With those 3 tape lines in place, you should have a little box to guide your strap tab placement. The box should be about 1 inch wide. Now cut 2 pieces of nylon webbing, each about 3 inches long. Grab your O-rings too. If the ends of your nylon are starting to fray, here's a quick optional step. Run the edge briefly past a lighter to seal it. Just a second is all it takes to melt the fibers and prevent fraying. Slide 1 piece of webbing through an O-ring and fold it in half. Place your strap tab inside your box on your side panel with the raw edges lining up at the bottom inside of the box. It's thick, so pinning can be tricky. I like to place 1 pin just to loosely hold it and then realign everything at the machine. Next, sew your strap tab. Switch to a heavy-duty needle if you have one, and I'd recommend changing your thread to match your strap so the stitching blends in. Unless, of course, you want to make a bold statement. Totally up to you. Place the strap tab in position, drop your needle to secure it, and sew a box around the strap edges just underneath the O-ring. The box should be about 1 inch by 1 inch. Once that's done, sew a X inside the box, corner to corner, to lock it in place. Reinforce your stitching so it's nice and secure. Be very careful near the O-ring. If your machine struggles with the thickness, turn your hand wheel manually. In fact, I recommend switching to the hand wheel as you get close to the metal anyway, just to be safe. Repeat the same process on the second side panel so you end up with 2 strap tabs installed. And yes, my O-rings don't match the rest of my hardware. I was in a hurry to start the project and this is what I had left, but I decided to go with it anyway because these O-rings won't bend under weight. Hey, function over fashion. You should now have a strap tab installed on each outer side panel and all of the main pieces in place. Now, step 14 is to press the top folds of the lining panels. This preps the top edges so they'll be nice and clean when we finish the bag. Take the 4 lining pieces, the 2 side panels, the front panel, and the back panel, and fold the top edge down 1/4 inch toward the inside, toward the stabilizer. Press that fold in place. Then fold it down another 1/4 inch and press again to create a double fold. Make sure you press both sides of the fold so the crease is sharp and secure. Just be careful in the back lining panel if you used a plastic zipper. Don't run the iron directly over the teeth. Clip the fold in place to hold it and set it aside so the crease can cool and stay sharp. Repeat this process with each of the 4 vertical lining panels. Next, press the top folds of the outer panels, the 2 sides, the front, and the back. This step is very similar to what we just did with the lining panels. Start by folding the top edge down 1/4 inch toward the inside and press it. Then fold it down another 1/4 inch to create a double fold and press again. I like to clip the fold in place as I go to lock the crease before moving down the edge. Once that double fold is pressed, fold the entire top edge down over the stabilizer. Press that and clip it in place to set the fold. The double fold encloses the raw edge, and the extra 1.5 inches creates the top border that will overlap the lining. Repeat the whole process for the other 3 outer panels and set it aside for now. Next, Next, let's sew down the top folds of the lining panels. Even though these folds will eventually get covered, stitching them now keeps them flat and clean to work with. Take each lining panel we prepared in step 14 and sew a straight stitch along the folded top edge. Sew close to the edge underneath the fold so it stays anchored down flat, not right along the very top fold itself. Repeat this with all 4 vertical lining panels. At this stage, all 4 lining panels should have their top folds sewn down with the raw edges enclosed, and all 4 outer shell panels should have their top folds pressed and clipped in place, but not sewn yet. Now let's construct the inner lining box. Start by sewing the side panels together. Place one lining side panel and the back lining panel right sides together, lining up the edges from top to bottom. Sew down the edge with an overedge stitch, widening your stitch width as much as your machine allows so it covers the basting stitches from when we attach the stabilizer. If your machine doesn't have an overedge stitch, use a zigzag stitch right over the edge instead. You can also use a straight stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but it won't be as strong and it won't enclose the raw edges. For this step, the overedge or zigzag is best. Repeat this with each side, opening up the box as you go so the right sides are always together. Sew one seam at a time. That way you're only dealing with 2 flat layers under the machine instead of wrestling with the whole box. Just keep flattening the seam you're sewing so it goes under the machine like any normal seam. When you reach the last side, place those final 2 panels right sides together and sew that seam to close up the 4 sides of the box. Next, add the bottom. Turn the lining box upside down, place the bottom panel right sides together with one side and center it. Pin that edge first, then pull the bottom panel out so it lays flat and perpendicular to the sides. Pin around all 4 edges, starting with the centers of each side and then working toward the corners. At each corner, push the bottom panel outward to flatten the fabric and get everything lined up. When it's pinned evenly, you should now have a full box shape with a closed bottom. Take it to the machine and sew the bottom in place, one side at a time, with an overedge or zigzag stitch. Again, widen the stitch width so it covers the basting stitches underneath. Sew one side, stop, cut your threads, and check your alignment before moving on to the next side. This makes it much easier to catch any spots that may have shifted or lost clips before it's too late. And just note, to get these seams under your machine, you'll need to flatten the box as much as possible. It's a bit bulky with the stabilizer, so take your time, hold it flat, and be prepared for some clips to pop off along the way. That's another reason why sewing one side at a time is the safest approach. You should now have a complete lining box. It's actually starting to look like something now. Step 18 is to construct the outer shell. Editing Victoria here again. Quick note about the handles. I'll be showing you how I built the outer shell first and then added the straps in the next step. That worked, but it meant that I had to sew the straps on by hand because I couldn't maneuver the bag under the machine once it was assembled. If you'd rather add the handle straps now, before building the box, you may find it easier to sew them on with your machine since the panels are still flat. The trade-off is that the measuring placement is trickier and the straps can get in the way while you're sewing the outer shell together. So it's up to you. If you want to add the straps first, skip ahead to step 19, which is time-stamped in the description below, then come back here to construct the outer shell. Otherwise, follow along with me as I put the shell together first. First, unclip the large top fold, that roughly 1.5 inch fold that wraps over the stabilizer, and unfold it. Leave the 1/4 inch double fold in place. Now build the outer shell the same way we built the lining. Place one large panel and one side panel right sides together, aligning the side edges from top to bottom. Keep that big top fold unfolded while the 1/4 inch double fold stays folded. So you'll see a bit of fabric extending past the stabilizer at the top. That's correct. Sew the side seams with an overedge or zigzag stitch, widening the stitch width so it covers the earlier basting stitch. Work with one panel at a time, just like we did with the lining. Repeat with the rest of the outer shell panels, and on the last side, place those panels right sides together and sew the final seam to close up the box. Next, add the bottom. Turn the shell upside down, place the bottom panel right sides together with one side of the shell and center it. Clip that side, then flip the bottom panel back out, clip all the way around. Sew the bottom on one side at a time with an overedge or zigzag, again widening the stitch. Sew a side, then stop and check to make sure nothing is shifted while you were flattening the box to get under the machine. Then move to the next side and repeat until all 4 sides of the bottom have been sewn. Finally, turn the outer shell right side out. Go slowly here, especially if you laminated your fabric. Push the shape out rather than pulling on the seams. It will take a bit of time and patience, but you really want to be careful not to pull the vinyl or the seams. It's It's best to keep trying to fold out / push it out rather than pulling on it. Once you've mostly gotten it, use your fingers to ease each corner into a crisp point. Be gentle so you don't stress the seam or poke through the vinyl. Once it's right side out, smooth the sides and corners so the shell holds its box shape. Now, step 19 is an optional step, but one I really recommend. This is where we press the corner seams of the outer shell to give the bag a crisp box shape instead of a rounded or bulky look. I start with one side seam at a time, smoothing the seam so that it lines up with itself and really pushing that corner outward. Then I lay the seam flat in its corner position, cover it with the backing paper, and give it a quick press. Don't worry about pressing the entire length of the seam, just focus on shaping the edges as much as possible. I repeat that for all 4 vertical seams, and then I also press where the bottom panel meets the sides. Again, this step isn't required, but it makes a big difference in how polished the finished bag looks. At this point, you should have a complete lining box and complete outer shell of your bag with crisp corners. Now let's install the front handle straps. Start by cutting 2 pieces of nylon webbing, each 15 inches long. On each strap, mark a point 1.5 inches in from each end. I'm using a disappearing ink marker here, but you can use whatever marking tool you have handy. Before moving on, go ahead and seal the cut edges of your webbing with a lighter if they're starting to fray. That way, the strap looks neat and finished. Next, fold each strap in half lengthwise between the 2 marks you just made and clip it in place. Use plenty of Wonder Clips here. It's thick and pins aren't ideal because they bend. Clip all the way along the curve so it stays even and in place. Now sew along each open edge of each folded strap with a straight stitch. You may want to switch to matching thread so it blends in, unless you're intentionally going for contrast. When you're done, you should have 2 thin doubled over handles with flat ends. Now it's time to place the first handle on the front of the bag. Mark 3 inches in from each side edge of the bag. That's where the outside edges of your strap will sit. Then mark a point 1.5 inches down from the top of the stabilizer. Think of it as if the top fold were already folded over, even though it's not yet. This gives us room to finish the top of the bag and better balances the weight and visual symmetry. Line up the bottom of each strap end at those marks. 3 inches from the sides and 1.5 inches down from the top of the stabilizer. Clip or pin them in place, being careful not to catch the top fold of the outer panel while you do it. Once both ends are lined up, sew each strap down with a 1 inch by 1 inch box and an X through the middle, just like we did with the side strap tabs. I was able to sew the top line of the box by machine, but once I realized how awkward it was to maneuver the bag under the needle, I switched to hand sewing the rest. It's slower, but honestly much simpler and less risky than trying to force the bulky shell under the machine. So, rather than risk pulling something or snagging the bag, I took this opportunity to put on a YouTube video and do it by hand. If you choose to sew it by hand, use small, tight stitches so it's strong, and a thimble if you need to protect your fingers. Now here's a tip I wish I had followed from the start. I stitched the first strap in without using thread magic, and it was a pain. My thread kept tangling. On the second end, I finally grabbed my thread magic, and it made all the difference. It conditions your thread so it doesn't knot up, and it works for both hand sewing and machine sewing. I'll link it in the description so you can grab some if you're interested. Anyway, after you finish both ends of the first handle, repeat the whole process for the second handle on the back panel. Once that's complete, your outer shell should have 2 handle straps and an unfinished top seam / piece of fabric. The next step is a fun one. We're finally sitting the lining inside the outer shell. We're so close to the end now, and this is the point where it really starts looking like a finished bag. Take your lining layer and place it inside the outer shell. Make sure you position it so the parts you want in the front are actually at the front. For me, that means the front lining pockets go toward the front of the bag and the zipper pocket sits at the back. As you set the lining in, also make sure the corners and seams line up. The lining seam should slide in right alongside the outer shell seams so they sit smoothly next to each other instead of pushing against each other and creating bulk. Once the lining is in place, line up the top edge of the lining with the top edge of the stabilizer of the outer shell. Then fold that extra outer shell fabric, the 1.5 inch fold we pressed earlier, over the top edge of the lining. Keep the 1/4 inch double fold intact at the raw edge so everything stays neat. Clip the fold all the way around the bag, making sure the fabric is smooth as you go. If your bag is laminated, definitely use Wonder Clips. Honestly, even if it isn't laminated, I still recommend clips. It's just easier to get everything held in place. It should all line up pretty naturally, but take Take a moment to check that the folds sit right in the creases you pressed earlier. You don't want to create a new fold line here. You're just refolding the one we already prepared. A good way to keep things smooth is to start clipping from the center of a panel and work outward towards the corners. At each corner, fold the fabric over a little so it lays flat, then clip it in place. And be careful, I actually snapped a couple of wonder clips while doing this step, and that makes me sad because they're really expensive. Before we finish up, if you're enjoying this tutorial, please hit the like button. It really helps support the channel, and subscribe for more sewing projects just like this one. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this project, so let me know in the comments if you plan on making this tote. And if you haven't grabbed your pattern yet, now's the perfect time. Not only will it make your sewing so much easier, but it's also a great way to support my work so I can keep creating tutorials. Now let's sew around the entire top edge of the bag to secure the lining to the outer shell. We're almost there. I'm removing my accessory box on my machine so I can access free arm sewing. If your machine has this option, I would recommend taking advantage of it. This makes it easier to slide the bag edge under as you sew. Next, grab a sewing gauge or a measuring tape and find a spot about 1 inch to 1 1/4 inches down from the top edge. You're not marking the bag itself, just lining it up against a seam allowance line or another reference point on your machine so you can stay consistent. Just make sure your stitching isn't so far down that it ends up below the folded over edge. You want to make sure you're actually catching the layers. Since this top edge can be thick, especially with vinyl, switch to a heavy duty needle and a Teflon foot. I'm starting at the back of the bag because if anything goes a little off, it's easier to hide it here. When lining up your starting point, get as close to the corner as you can, but don't worry about the corner just yet. Sew a straight stitch all the way across until you get close to the next corner, gently guiding the bag through. Sometimes the vinyl can stick against the machine on the underside, so you may need to lightly encourage the fabric along gently, but don't pull hard and risk snagging the vinyl or messing up your machine. Also, please note you will be sewing over the handle strap attachment. That's expected and okay. Once that side is complete, check it, and if all looks well, repeat the same thing across the top border of the front side. Next, sew along the top of each side. This part is trickier. You'll need to squish the bag the opposite way it naturally wants to go so you can flatten the edge under the presser foot. Sew between the corners, stopping right at the corner but not over it. Do the same on the other side. Now for the corners. Flatten one corner as much as possible so you can get that 90-degree angle under the machine. This will take some fiddling with to get it in place, flat, and aligned straight. Line it up with your previous seam guide and sew carefully. This part is thick. Go slowly, and if needed, use your hand wheel to walk through the stitches. Be patient here and watch for needle strain or thread breakage. This is one of the hardest parts, so don't be discouraged if you're struggling with it. As you can see, I am. If you take it slow and turn your hand wheel manually, you're less likely to run into as many issues. And we've nearly finished, so hang in there. Once you've got one corner stitched, repeat this step with the 3 remaining corners. Also, just so you know, I seem to have demonstrated this on the most difficult corner. I can happily say that the other corners were much easier in comparison, although still a challenge. Once this step is complete, you have a functioning organizer tote bag. Woo! Now all we need to do is add the shoulder strap. But before we add that shoulder strap, here's an optional step I really recommend. After all the turning, flattening, and sewing we just did, the vinyl or fabric around the top edge can start to look a little wrinkled and rough, almost like linen does after you crumple it. Pressing those top edges helps smooth everything out, sharpen all 4 corners and edges again, and gives the bag a clean, polished look. I'm just sliding my bag over the edge of the ironing board and gently pressing along the seams between the straps and on the side where I can actually fit my iron. You won't be able to get every inch perfect because the handles are in the way, but that's okay. Now our final step is to install the shoulder strap. Start by cutting a length of nylon webbing to 55 inches or your preferred length. 55 inches isn't random though. It's a solid starting point for a crossbody or adjustable strap, and you can tweak longer or shorter to taste. I like to fold the webbing in half to 27.5 inches and cut there. Seal the cut ends with a quick pass of a lighter if needed. Now thread the hardware. So grab your strap adjuster first and one end of your strap. Put one end up through the bottom bar of the adjuster and down through the top slot. Feed most of the strap length through. Now for our first swivel hook. Take the other end of the strap through through a swivel hook, then bring that same end back to the adjuster and feed it through the adjuster again in the same direction as before, but underneath the first layer so it slides freely. Pull it through, fold the tail under by about 1 inch and clip it. This is the end we'll stitch at the adjuster. Now for our second swivel hook. Go back to the remaining free end of the strap. Feed it through the second swivel hook, then fold the end back by about 1.5 inches so you have room to stitch without running into the hook. Clip it in place. Now let's take it to the machine. Stitch each folded end with a 1 inch by 1 inch box and an X through the center, just like the other strap tabs. At the adjuster end, be sure you're only sewing the folded tail itself. Be sure not to catch the main strap or you'll lock the adjuster and lose the ability to tighten or loosen the strap. At the end with the second swivel hook, sew slowly around the hardware. The presser foot won't sit perfectly flat right next to the swivel hook, so ease past that spot and, if needed, walk the hand wheel so you can make sure not to hit the metal. Once both ends are stitched, test the adjuster and make sure it slides smoothly. Then clip the swivel hooks onto the O-rings on each side of the bag. And that's it! Your shoulder strap is installed. And here it is, the finished tote. I'm so happy with how it turned out. It's stylish, practical, and ready for everyday use. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!